For a long time, we revered the rags to riches story, maybe because in the Great Depression, everyone was poor. You're bringing up a really important point, and that's talking about what we consider to be justifiable versus unjustifiable poverty. I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I research the unwritten rules of work for the working class, neurodivergence, and intersections of race and gender. When I was doing my dissertation on the unwritten rules of work for the working class, I needed to decide which criteria I was going to set. And even though my grad school was in Miami, and at the time I was living in California, and it would have been way easier to look at white people and Latinos, I intentionally chose white and the Black community. And this is because for a lot of American history, though I think this is changing somewhat, Black people were never placed in the justifiable poverty section, even though they were denied access to paid work for hundreds of years. So let me read you this from my dissertation. It is also important to expand our examination of social class and workplace norms to include not only white men and women for whom class mobility and stigma may have one set of meanings and implications, but also racial ethnic minorities for whom social class prejudices and experiences may differ. Specific to social class, African Americans are frequently depicted as poor by the media, even though most people living in poverty are white. Additionally, they are stigmatized as living in poverty due to a lack of work ethic, while other racial minorities, such as Hispanics and Asians, are presented as having a greater work ethic. Now, there are issues with that in itself, and I do think that's changing right now, particularly with Hispanics. Feel free to push back. Would love to hear more on this, especially from people in those groups. Continue. Consequently, African Americans are associated with a form of poverty that lacks sympathy. For example, African Americans are not represented as poor during the Great Depression, which is viewed as a time of justified and sympathetic poverty. They are also not illustrated as partaking in Social Security, but are instead stereotyped as participating in welfare programs. Because African Americans are stereotyped as lacking a strong work ethic, their motives and mere presence conflict with the American dream ideology. One study found that while most Americans believe African Americans are responsible for their failure to One study found that most Americans believe African Americans are responsible for their failure to systematically achieve the American dream, and that racial discrimination was not the cause. Since there appears to be a conflict between how people perceive social mobility and how people examine African Americans, it is important to evaluate how social class mobility, their social experiences as they move up, since there appears to be a conflict between how people perceive social mobility and how people examine African Americans, it is important to evaluate how social class mobility, their social experiences as they move up, perceptions of their mobility, and the cultural norms impact African American people as well. This is why I have always included race and gender in my social class research. I would be a pretty wealthy white woman if I would just not do it as people want me to, especially now. But it's simply not the case. First research study found that even white men from poverty backgrounds feel the need to conceal this poor background once they move up into middle class or higher work. And if that is their experience, imagine what that adds to your work dynamics when your poverty is not seen as justifiable, even in extreme circumstances.